On October 29, 1929, the American stock market lost $14 billion in a single day. Within 3 years, a third of all banks in the United States had failed, taking the life savings of millions of families with them. By 1933, unemployment reached 25%. A dozen eggs cost 13 cents. 250,000 families lost their homes to foreclosure. The government had no welfare system, no food stamps, no unemployment insurance. There was nothing between a family and starvation, except what that family could do with its own hands. Number 14 on this list kept families warm through entire winters without spending a cent. Number 7 shows how grandmothers fed a family of 6 on less than $1 a week. These were not luxuries that were cut. These were survival techniques invented by ordinary people who had been told by every institution in the country that the system would protect them, and then watch that system collapse overnight. Before we start, hit subscribe. What you are about to hear is not financial advice. It is a record of how American families survived the worst economic disaster in modern history, using nothing but ingenuity, community, and the refusal to quit. Let us count down the 25 forgotten Depression-era tricks. Number 25, hiding money outside the banking system. When the banks failed, families who had trusted them lost everything. The ones who survived were the ones who had never trusted them completely. Your grandmother hid cash in coffee cans buried in the backyard, in mason jars sealed inside fence posts, behind loose bricks in the chimney, sewn into the lining of a winter coat, and stuffed between the pages of a family Bible. She divided her savings across multiple hiding places so that if one was found, the rest survived. To this day, homeowners renovating Depression-era houses find cash hidden in walls, under floorboards, and inside piano legs. A family in Ohio discovered $182,000 inside their walls during a renovation. A couple in California found $10 million in gold coins buried in rusted cans on their property. Your grandmother's distrust of banks was not paranoia. It was the most rational financial decision available to a woman who had watched her neighbors lose everything to an institution that had promised to keep it safe. Number 24, saving and reusing bacon grease. Nothing was wasted. When bacon was cooked, the rendered fat was poured through a strainer into a tin can or a glass jar kept beside the stove. That grease was used for everything. It replaced butter for frying eggs, and it replaced lard for baking biscuits. It was spread on bread when there was nothing else. It was used to season cast iron, to waterproof boots, and to make soap when combined with lye. 1 pound of bacon produced enough grease to last a week of cooking. The grease jar was never empty because it was never allowed to be. Your grandmother treated bacon fat the way a modern household treats olive oil, except hers was free because it was a byproduct of a meal she was already making. Number 23, growing a survival garden on every available surface. By 1934, there were an estimated 20 million subsistence gardens in the United States. Families grew vegetables on rooftops, in window boxes, in vacant lots, along railroad tracks, and in every inch of backyard soil they could reach. Your grandmother grew potatoes, beans, tomatoes, carrots, onions, cabbage, and turnips. She saved her seeds from year to year and never bought them. She composted kitchen scraps to build soil. She planted in succession so that something was always ready to harvest. The garden was not a hobby. It was the difference between eating and not eating. A well-managed backyard garden could produce enough vegetables to feed a family of 4 through the growing season, and if properly canned and preserved, through winter as well. Number 22, making flour sack clothing. During the Depression, flour, sugar, and animal feed were sold in cotton sacks. When manufacturers realized that women were using the empty sacks to make clothing, they began printing the fabric with patterns and colors. Your grandmother cut open those sacks, washed them, and sewed dresses, shirts, curtains, dish towels, and underwear. A single 50-pound flour sack produced enough fabric for a child's dress. A family that bought flour in printed sacks had a textile supply built into its grocery budget. The sewing was done by hand or on a treadle machine that required no electricity. A missing button was never a reason to discard a garment. A torn seam was never a reason to buy a replacement. Everything was mended until it could no longer hold a stitch. Then it became a cleaning rag, then a quilt patch, then stuffing. Nothing was thrown away until it had lived 4 or 5 lives. Number 21. The perpetual soup pot. Your grandmother kept a pot on the back of the wood stove that never went completely empty. Every scrap of vegetable, every bone, every heel of bread, every wilted leaf went into the pot. Water was added, and the pot simmered all day. By evening, it was soup. The next morning, whatever was left became the base for the next day's pot. The soup was never the same 2 days in a row because the ingredients changed with whatever was available. A bone that had already been boiled 3 times still gave up flavor. A potato peel that would have been garbage became the body of the broth. The perpetual pot fed a family on scraps that a modern kitchen would throw in the trash without thinking. Number 20. Bartering labor for food. When there was no money, there was still work. Your grandfather knocked on doors and offered to chop wood, repair fences, dig gardens, paint houses, and fix anything that was broken, in exchange for a meal or a bag of vegetables. He was not begging. He was trading the only currency he had left, which was his ability to work. The barter economy of the Depression was vast and largely unrecorded. Doctors accepted chickens as payment. Landlords accepted labor in lieu of rent. Farmers traded surplus crops with neighbors for skills they did not have. The cash economy had collapsed. The human economy kept going because people still needed things done, and other people could still do them. Number 19. Canning everything the garden produced. Canning the garden into winter meals. Your grandmother canned between 200 and 500 jars of food per summer. Tomatoes, green beans, corn, peaches, pickles, jams, jellies, applesauce, and meat when she could get it. The jars lined the basement shelves like a library of survival. Each jar was a meal that would keep for years without refrigeration. The pressure canner was her most valuable piece of equipment. She ran it on a wood stove in a kitchen that reached 110 degrees in August. She did not complain about the heat because the alternative was an empty pantry in February. First pattern break. Here's the thing about Depression-era survival that nobody talks about today. These people were not prepared. They did not read books about self-reliance before the crash. They did not stock emergency kits or attend survival seminars. They were ordinary Americans who had jobs and bank accounts and grocery stores and electricity and running water and all of the systems that modern life depends on. And then, in the space of 3 years, most of those systems failed. What saved them was not preparation, it was adaptability. The grandmother who learned to can food in 1931 had never canned food in 1928. The grandfather who learned to repair shoes had been buying them new 2 years earlier. They invented their survival as they went, using whatever they had and whatever they could learn from the neighbor who already knew. That adaptability, the willingness to learn a skill you never thought you would need, is the thing that no modern emergency plan can replace. Number 17, making soap from kitchen scraps. Your grandmother saved every scrap of cooking fat, every burnt end of lard, every unusable piece of tallow. She combined it with lye, made from wood ash and water, cooked it in a kettle, and produced blocks of soap that cleaned clothes, dishes, floors, and bodies. A single batch lasted months. She did not buy soap because she did not need to. The ingredients were byproducts of a kitchen that was already operating. The soap was harsh by modern standards, but it cleaned, and cleaning was not optional when disease could kill a child faster than hunger. Number 16, using newspapers for insulation and everything else. Your grandmother stuffed newspaper between the walls and the siding to insulate the house. She layered it inside shoes when the soles wore through. She used it as wrapping paper, as shelf liner, as window shade, as fire starter, and as toilet paper when there was nothing else. A single newspaper served 10 purposes before it was burned in the stove for heat. Nothing that entered the house left the house without being used completely. Number 15. Making clothing last across generations. A coat was not one person's coat. It was the family coat. The oldest child wore it first. When she outgrew it, the sleeves were let out and the buttons were moved, and the next child wore it. When the fabric finally gave out, the good sections were cut away and used to patch other garments. The buttons were saved in a button jar on the shelf, and it served as the family's hardware store. Your grandmother could disassemble a worn-out shirt and reassemble its usable parts into a child's vest in an afternoon. She did this not because she enjoyed sewing, but because the nearest store was 10 miles away, and the price of a new shirt was a week's food. Your grandfather heated the house with whatever burned. He collected deadfall from the woods. He walked along the railroad tracks, picking up chunks of coal that had fallen from passing trains. He burned corn cobs, dried cow manure, and the wooden pallets that factories threw away. Fuel was never purchased when it could be scavenged. He sealed the windows with rags and newspaper and hung blankets over doorways to keep the heat in smaller rooms. The family slept in one room in winter, sharing body heat and blankets. The stove was loaded last thing at night and banked to burn slowly until morning. Heat was never wasted when it could be contained. Number 13. Raising chickens and rabbits in the backyard. A small flock of chickens and a pair of breeding rabbits could sustain a family's protein supply indefinitely. The chickens produced eggs daily. The rabbits multiplied every 30 days. Both ate table scraps and garden waste that would otherwise be composted. Your grandmother kept 6 hens and a rooster in a backyard coop she built from scrap lumber. The eggs fed the family. The surplus was traded to neighbors. An old hen that stopped laying became soup. Nothing was sentimental about a chicken when your children were hungry. Number 12. Stretching a single meal to feed twice as many people. Your grandmother added water to the soup. She added breadcrumbs to the meatloaf until the meat was barely a flavoring agent. She stretched a single chicken across 3 meals. She roasted it the first night, made sandwiches the second, and turned the carcass into soup on the third. She made milk last by diluting it with water and adding a drop of vanilla to mask the thinness. She served bread with every meal because bread was filling and cheap. A 5-cent loaf of bread, a 10-cent soup bone, and whatever came out of the garden fed a family of 6 for a day. The skill was not cooking. The skill was arithmetic. Number 11. Foraging from the wild. Your grandmother knew which plants were edible and which were not. She gathered dandelion greens, wild onions, pokeweed shoots, lamb's quarters, and watercress from fields, ditches, and creek banks. She picked blackberries, elderberries, and persimmons from hedgerows and wood edges. She sent the children out to gather walnuts, hickory nuts, and pecans from trees that grew on nobody's land and everybody's land. In the worst years, foraging was not a supplement. It was a primary food source. The children who grew up eating dandelion greens did not think of them as weeds. They thought of them as dinner. Second pattern break. Here is what the Depression taught that the recovery made everyone forget. A family that can feed itself from a garden, preserve food in jars, sew its own clothing, heat its home with scavenged fuel, and trade labor for what it cannot produce, is a family that cannot be destroyed by an economic collapse. It can be hurt, it can be diminished, but it cannot be starved out, because its survival does not depend on the system that failed. The generation that survived the Depression knew this in their bones. They passed it to their children as a reflex: the saved bacon grease, the button jar, the garden, the canning jars. Their grandchildren received the habits without the explanation. Their great-grandchildren received neither. We now live in a country where the average household has less than 3 days of food and no ability to produce more. The Depression generation would find that terrifying. They would also find it fixable. Number 9. Reusing and patching shoes, making shoes last for years. A good pair of shoes was expected to last for years. When the sole wore through, your grandfather cut a piece of cardboard and placed it inside. When the cardboard wore through, he cut another. When the leather cracked, he patched it with a piece cut from an old belt. He learned to resole his own shoes using rubber cut from old tires and glued with homemade adhesive. A pair of shoes that would be thrown away today after 6 months lasted 3 years in the Depression, because the alternative was going barefoot, and going barefoot in winter was not an option. Number 8. Making do with one-pot meals that cost almost nothing. Bean soup, potato soup, cabbage soup, rice and beans, cornbread and milk. These were not recipes. They were equations. Your grandmother calculated the cost per serving of everything she cooked, and she never spent a penny more than she had to. A pot of bean soup made from dried beans, an onion, and a ham bone cost less than 15 cents and fed a family for 2 days. Cornbread made from cornmeal, water, and a spoonful of lard cost 3 cents a pan. She did not buy cookbooks. She did not need inspiration. She needed calories that would keep 6 people alive until tomorrow, and she found them in the same 4 or 5 ingredients every week. Number 7, stretching flour into everything. Flour was the foundation of Depression-era cooking. Your grandmother made bread, biscuits, pancakes, dumplings, noodles, gravy, pie crust, and thickener for soups from the same 25-pound sack. She extended meat with flour-based dumplings that absorbed the broth and filled the stomach. She made water pie, a pie with no fruit, just water, sugar, butter, vanilla, and a flour-thickened filling that tasted like something more than what it was. She made everything from flour because flour was the cheapest calorie available, and a 25-pound sack could last a month if she was careful. She was always careful. Number 6, building community through shared resources. No family survived the Depression alone. Your grandmother shared her garden surplus with the neighbor whose garden failed. The neighbor shared her canning equipment when your grandmother's lids ran out. The men organized work crews that rotated through each family's property, making repairs that no single family could afford. Churches held community suppers where everyone brought what they could, and nobody went home hungry. The community was the safety net that the government had not yet built. When it finally arrived in the form of the New Deal, it was modeled on what communities had already been doing for themselves. Number 5, learning to fix everything. Your grandfather became a plumber, an electrician, a carpenter, a mechanic, and a cobbler because he could not afford to hire any of them. He learned by watching, by asking, and by taking things apart to understand how they worked. He fixed the pump, the stove, the roof, the car, and the chair. He sharpened the saw, the axe, and the knife. He did not own power tools because he did not have electricity for most of the decade. He owned hand tools that he maintained with the care of surgical instruments because replacing them was impossible. The skill of fixing things, which had once been a convenience, became a survival necessity overnight. Your grandmother dug a hole in the ground, lined it with stones, and stored potatoes, carrots, turnips, beets, onions, apples, and cabbages through the winter. The earth maintained a constant temperature of about 50 degrees, cool enough to prevent spoilage, and warm enough to prevent freezing. A well-stocked root cellar extended the growing season by 6 months. Combined with canned goods from the summer, it meant that a family with a garden and a root cellar could eat through an entire winter without buying a single thing from a store. When your grandfather slaughtered a hog, nothing was wasted. The meat was smoked, salted, or canned. The fat was rendered into lard for cooking and soap. The skin was scraped, salted, and dried into leather. The intestines were cleaned and used as sausage casings. The feet were pickled. The head was boiled for head cheese. The bones were cracked for marrow and then boiled into broth. The blood was mixed with cornmeal and fried into blood pudding. A single hog produced food, soap, and leather that kept a family fed for months. The idea that any part of an animal could be classified as waste would have been incomprehensible. Your grandmother, every part was food, fuel, or raw material. Nothing was thrown away because nothing could be spared. Number 2, the mattress bank and the coffee can vault. Your grandmother did not trust the banks after 1929, and she never trusted them again. She kept a reserve of cash hidden in the house and on the property at all times. She sewed bills into the hem of a curtain. She rolled coins into a sock and buried it under the fence post nearest the kitchen window so she could watch the spot. She tucked bills between the pages of the family Bible and inside the lining of the winter coat that hung by the door. She kept her wealth distributed across a dozen hiding places, and she told only one person where they all were. That person was her oldest daughter. The information was passed down like a map to buried treasure, because that is exactly what it was. When banks began to recover and FDIC insurance was established, your grandmother opened a savings account and deposited the minimum. She kept the rest in the coffee can. Number 1, the refusal to waste anything. This is not a single trick. It is the principle that held all the others together. Your grandmother did not waste food, fabric, fuel, water, daylight, or motion. She did not waste time because time was labor, and labor was survival. She reused every container, repurposed every scrap, and extended the life of every object until it could no longer serve any function. She was not frugal because she chose to be. She was frugal because the alternative was watching her children go without. That discipline, learned in the worst years of the 20th century, never left her. 40 years after the Depression ended, she was still saving aluminum foil, still washing plastic bags, still keeping the button jar on the shelf. Her children thought it was a habit. It was not a habit. It was a scar. It was the mark left by a decade in which waste was the difference between surviving and not surviving. Every item on this list came from that scar. Here is your challenge. Save one thing this week that you would normally throw away. Cook one meal from scraps. Fix one thing instead of replacing it. Tell me in the comments what your grandparents saved, what they reused, what they refused to throw away even decades after the Depression ended. That discipline did not die. It just went quiet when the grocery stores filled up and the banks reopened and everyone decided that abundance was permanent. It is time to remember that it never was.